Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa from the Bolinas Library, and today we're going to read some books. It's that time again. I hope you've been doing a lot of reading at home with a family member or a friend. Maybe you've been reading to a pet or a stuffy. What is a favorite book that you have been looking at lately? I know it's so hard to choose sometimes. There's so many good books. First though, I want to say that this month is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and so we want to celebrate all the vibrant and diverse traditions, contributions, and voices of Asians and Asian Americans. Of course, the celebration and honoring should happen every day of every month, not just this month. And of course, there are many different stories to be told. There's no one experience that tells the story and background from any culture. So today I would like to share a few books, and again these are just a couple stories, and they are about some of my favorite artists that also happen to be Japanese American and Chinese American. And this story is about Yayoi Kusama, From Here to Eternity by Sarah Suzuki, illustrated by Ellen Weinstein, with permission from the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I got to see this artist's work when I went to Japan once, and it was really exciting to see in real life. And I hope that you can get a little taste of what her art is like from this book. Yayoi Kusama was born in the country of Japan, on the island of Honshu, in a town called Matsumoto City. An old palace made of wood and stone overlooked a moat where swans swam. The streets were lined with little shops, and snow-capped mountains rose in the distance, swallowing up the sun as they went down in the evening. Yayoi's family owned nurseries, where all kinds of flowers and vegetables grew, and workers tended the plants as they matured from seeds to sprouts to stalks. But Yayoi yearned for a different life. Far from the countryside, she dreamed about what lay beyond the mountains and places far from Matsumoto City. She longed to leave home and see the world. Yayoi's mother wanted her to stay home and learn old-fashioned manners, how to dress elegantly, walk demurely, eat politely, and find a proper husband. But Yayoi wanted to be an artist. Every day she went outside with ink and brushes and paper. She drew things she saw and things she imagined. She looked closely at the pebbles that lined the riverbed and all the leaves and stalks of plants, and she drew them as chains of tiny cells that looked like dots. When she was older and studying in art school, her teachers disapproved of her work, and they demanded that Yayoi paint in their traditional, precise Japanese style. She wanted to go where she could live without rules. Have you ever created something in school and were told that you should do it a different way? Well, that is what's happened here, and that's happened to me too. And when you're creating art, there's no one way or no one right way to do it. When she was 28 years old, she packed up her silk kimonos and thousands of drawings and stuffed dollar bills into the toes of her shoes. It was her first airplane trip. There were only 4 other passengers, and the weather was stormy with rain and lightning. The airplane wobbled and dipped as it flew to America. In New York, Yayoi went to the top of the Empire State Building, the tallest building in a city full of tall buildings. When she looked down, she saw buses, cars, and yellow taxis zooming up and down the avenues, and bankers and teachers and artists rushing to work. From up on the 86th floor, they looked like little dots. She felt very far from quiet Matsumoto City and her mother's rules. Here it seemed anything was possible. Have you ever been up on a tall building that high? Perhaps the 86th floor? Oh my goodness, that is a very tall building. And looked down to see all the little people look like little tiny people. Yayoi set about turning her drawings of dots into paintings. The dollar bills that she had brought to America quickly ran out, and she spent what little money she had left on paints and canvases. She worked day and night. She painted when she was cold. She painted when she was hungry. She painted when she was lonely. And she turned her dots into sculptures, too, into soft, stuffed tubes that covered sofas and chairs and boats. She was devoted to her dots. For her, they were a way of thinking about the world among the stars as one dot among millions of others. They were a way of thinking about infinity. Sometimes, when she grew frustrated, she visited the Museum of Modern Art. She gazed at paintings by other artists, and she thought about why or how they were made. She looked at pictures of dancing girls and swirling night skies, trying to solve them as if they were puzzles. And if you've ever been to a museum before, you will see lots of different types of paintings and sculptures, and one might speak to you, and one you might think, whoa, that is very different and interesting. Her paintings seemed so different from those she had seen at the MoMA, which is the art museum. When she at last was ready to show her work in public, she invited all the friends she had made in New York. When she arrived at the gallery, a crowd was spilling out onto the sidewalk. Her friends lifted her into the air, shouting, "Yayoi, you've finally done it!" Word about her artwork spread quickly. Her friends told their friends, newspapers wrote about her work, and reporters wanted to interview her about her dots. Now she began to show them in other cities all over the United States and Europe. Her dots were covering the world. They appeared in Venice in thousands of dot-shaped mirrors scattered over a big green lawn, and on a pumpkin, on a pier, on dresses and t-shirts, on people walking down the street, and in mirrored rooms where glowing dots were reflected and reflected again, an infinity of dots. And there she is. Having visited many countries all over the world, Yayoi returned to Japan. The country had changed since she left, with many different artists challenging the old traditional style, as Yayoi had been doing all along. She still lives in Japan, and she continues to paint her dots every day. And here are some photographs of her artwork. And here is a chair that she made. This one is the Infinity Mirrored Room. It's a bunch of mirrors, the souls of it millions of light years away. Wow. And this one, look, it's a room full of dots. And when I went to the museum in Japan, they had a little room like this, and there were a bunch of stickers, and you could add dots to the room so you could help create the piece of art as you went in. And here she is. Is there something you like to draw over and over? Maybe it's a shape, maybe it's a dot as well, or maybe a squiggle, or maybe an animal or a creature that you love to draw over and over. And you know, when you practice, you get really good at something, and you never know where it's going to lead. And maybe it's not something you draw. Maybe you like to do things in 3D. Maybe some kind of clay sculpture, or maybe some other kind of material out of wood, or a 3D paper image, or something with metal. This is a story about Ruth Asawa in our next book, A Life Made by Hand, and let's see what kind of creations she makes. And this book is by Andrea D'Aquino with permission from Princeton Architectural Press. This is the story of an artist you may have never heard of, or maybe you have. Her name is Ruth Asawa. She was born in California, and her whole family worked on a farm, and everyone around her worked with their hands. And when you work on a farm, it's hard work, but it is good work. And Ruth looked carefully at everything around her. What kind of plant are you? She wondered. What a fascinating shape your shell is, snail. What delicate and beautiful wings you have, my friend. Hello, spider. How did you figure out how to make your web? So, while she is out there, outside, she's noticing a lot of other little details. And this might happen to you if you're ever outside or going on a walk or helping your parents work on a farm or a garden. You might be noticing all of the things around us. Ruth liked to look at the drops of water in her garden. She often stopped to notice how the light shone through their delicate shapes. Her hands were always busy making things out of anything she could find. She made tiny animals out of the wire she found around the farm. She created shapes by folding paper. She loved to draw forms in the dirt with her bare feet. Do you ever do that? Or maybe in the sand if you go and visit the beach? On Saturdays, Ruth got a break from busy farm work. Her parents sent her to Japanese school where she was giving lessons in calligraphy. She learned to hold the paintbrush and shape the bold characters with black ink. When Ruth was older, she continued to study art. She went to Black Mountain College, an unusual school filled with brilliant people. People like choreographer Mercy Cunningham, who made shapes in the air with dancers' bodies. And one of her most inventive teachers, Buckminster Fuller, who was always busy coming up with new ideas to make our planet a better place to live. Joseph Albers taught students to make art out of everything around them. Leaves, paper, wire, clay, even garbage. Don't throw it away. Just look at it in a new way. He became famous for his square color paintings. Ruth was eager to learn from interesting people around her. On a trip to Mexico, a local craftsman taught her how to weave with wire, looping it around and around to make baskets. When Ruth got back home, she experimented with wire. She was so excited to discover that a line can go anywhere. In Ruth's hands, simple wire turned into graceful sculptures that were light as air. Ruth continued to weave all day, even when she had a family of her own around her. Her hands never stopped moving as she looped and looped over and over. So similarly, she practiced over and over with the kind of material that she really liked to use. Now it was time for other people to look closely and wonder, how did she make that? I think it defies gravity. Is it some kind of sea creature? Maybe something from outer space. What does it look like to you? The one thing everyone knew was that her sculptures were beautiful. People go to see Ruth's art in museums all around the world, and so can you. The end. In this other book called Ruth Asawa, A Sculpting Life by Joan Shetler, we can see in the back of the book some photographs of her and her work. And I hope someday you get to see some more photographs or see her work in real life, because it truly is magnificent. There are many different ways to make art, and there are many, many, many different artists, and there are many, many different ways to see the world. And that's what makes art so interesting, is to be able to see, to observe and look and see things just a little bit differently. And with love and kindness, we can create some really beautiful things. In the back of this book, there's instructions on how to make a paper dragonfly, just like the one that Ruth saw and studied when she was a little girl. And in order to make a paper dragonfly, you can take a piece of paper and fold it like an accordion, back and forth for the wings. And then at the end, you cut a little strip. And glue this. And then fold this. You can also glue the accordion piece. You can glue 2 different color pieces of paper back to back, so you can have one side one color and one side the other. And then you take your extra little piece to glue it for the body, and then you have your wings. And look, you have a dragonfly! In this next book called Paper Sun, the inspiring story of Tyrus Wong, immigrant and artist. This story is about another artist who comes to America from China, and it's written by Julie Leung, illustrated by Suzuki. And let's see what happens in his story. Before he became an artist named Tyrus Wong, he was a boy named Wong who traveled with his father across the vast ocean to America, clutching a bundle of papers in his hand. The papers were not for drawing monkeys, which he loved to do. They were papers describing the life of another Chinese boy, whom Yang Yao was pretending to be. He had to memorize every word. In 1919, Chinese immigrants were not allowed into the United States unless they could prove they were citizens of high status, a scholar, a merchant, a business owner, or the child of such a citizen. So the boy's father pretended to be a merchant, and he pretended to be the son. He was now a paper son. Every night, the boy studied the answers to exacting questions. What are the names of the families who live in your village? Who is the leader of your district? How far is it to the next village? The immigration officials will ask me the same questions and compare our answers to make sure you are my son, his father said. If they do not match, you will be sent back and never see Gumsun. Gumsun means Gold Mountain in Cantonese. That was what the Chinese called America because of the opportunities there. See, his father would say, pointing to the horizon. Let's see if you can see the boat. Life in Gumsun will be like a blank paper, and we will decide how to mark it. The boy followed his father's gaze to where water met the sky. Maybe he would spot a glimmer of Gold Mountain too. At last they arrived at Angel Island. His father, who had been in America before, cleared immigration quickly, but the boy was held back. Scared and alone, Gung Yao was taken to a wooden house filled with strangers. There he waited. Days turned to weeks. This new land was not what he expected. The streets were not lined with gold. The barracks were crowded and dirty. He missed his father very much. There was no drawing paper, no ink, no paint. He watched the sun move slowly across the sky, always arching back toward the home he'd left behind. Finally, Gung Yao was brought in front of 3 men who bombarded him with questions. How many windows does your house have? What direction does your village face? Where did you go to school? The boy was nervous, but he remembered all his answers from the coaching papers his father had given him. He was released from Angel Island. Whew, his father was waiting with him with arms outstretched. Now we must look for opportunities, he said. At school in Sacramento, Wang Yao was given a new name by his teachers, a name that combined his real name and his paper name. Yao was Americanized to Tyrus Wong. Tyrus did not like school. He preferred sketching to science, doodles to diagrams, art to arithmetic. Tyrus's father had been well educated in China, but to be a Chinese immigrant was to be a servant, a laundryman, a waiter, and to find these jobs he often had to travel far, leaving Tyrus alone for months. Oh no. Still, his father believed life in America could be a blank paper. One day he brought home a brush and made Tyrus practice Chinese calligraphy. Because they could not afford ink and paper, Tyrus wrote with water on old newspapers. And after the paper dried, his father would say, "One more time." His father borrowed enough money to send Tyrus to Otis Art Institute in Los Angeles, where it's a school. Tyrus learned to paint and draw in a Western style, smudging thick charcoal to form shadows and mirroring the way lights hit objects. He also studied artwork from China's Song dynasty, when watercolors and simple lines communicated much by showing little. The lushness of a flower could be left with gradual increases of color, and mountains could be loom in the distance with a few jagged lines. In the evenings, Tyrus mopped the floor as a school janitor. He swirled the soapy water around, the mop dancing in his hands like a paintbrush. Have you ever painted with water and then let it dry up? Tyrus graduated at the top of his class and began working as an in-betweener at the Walt Disney Studios. In the early days of animation, in-betweeners drew the frames in between a movie's key art. The same scenes over and over with only small changes each time to create the feeling of movement. The work was boring and his eyes throbbed. One day, Tyrus heard that Disney was making a movie called Bambi about a young deer who must learn to survive without his mother. But the animators were having trouble creating the backdrops. Tyrus thought about his mother he had left behind in China and the father who had always believed in him. He thought about his style of painting, one that combined East and West, his past and his present. Tyrus saw an opportunity. He spent his days painting landscapes instead of drawing a forest scene leaf by leaf, tree by tree. He created the feeling of woods and mountains with sparse brushstrokes and soft watercolors. Where other artists might use 10 strokes of a brush, he used 5. The result was breathtaking. Walt Disney loved it. He instructed his animators to follow Tyrus's style. Bambi became a groundbreaking film. Audiences and critics gushed about the art, how it communicated so much by showing so little, how you could almost smell the mossy green of the woods and hear the rushing water of the brook. But in the end, Tyrus was credited only as a background artist, so they didn't give him proper credit for all of his beautiful work. Walt Disney Studios fired Tyrus after an employee strike, even though he did not participate. It would be many years before the world saw Tyrus Wong for the artist that he was. But Tyrus never stopped painting, and not just on paper. Throughout his life, he would draw his art on ceramics, silk scarves, murals, menus. Tyrus always found new ways to leave his mark. As an older man, Tyrus discovered a love of kites, caterpillars, and pandas, fish, and butterflies. He would tell people he wanted to be looking up. How else could one see Gold Mountain? On sunny days, you could often find Tyrus Wong on the beach, facing the ocean he crossed so long ago, flying a large, colorful kite he'd made himself, glimmering gold where water met the sky. The end. And here are pictures of him when he was a little boy and as he grew up. There are so many different stories I wish I could share with you. Here are a few more that you can check out from your library. These books are all stories either written by or are about Asian American and Pacific Islander experiences. This book is called It Began with a Page. Is another story about an artist, how Guyu Fujikawa drew the way. And this story is about an artist who drew picture books in the 60s. And she made sure that she represented all of the kids and babies that are in our country and our world. And that was really an important thing that wasn't really happening much then. So she really paved the way for that. And here's another book called The Flying Paintings, the Zhou brothers, a story of revolution in art. And this is a story about 2 brothers who grew up in China and made beautiful paintings, even in a really hard time in their country, and how they traveled the world, and they ended up in the United States. And this book is actually also drawn and painted by the artists themselves. And this book has some really beautiful illustrations. There are other books about stories about families, stories about the present, stories about the past, old legends and folk tales. There's so many different stories, and I'm so happy that you could join me today. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.